why aren't you in your tea gown? Because today, we're gonna get messy. So, as you have probably surmised, between last year's video and the year before, I am a filthy Homestuck. Yes, a Homestuck. In the year of our Lord 2021, I still can't get out of this hell fandom. So, for this year, for 413, I've done dresses for 413 the past 2 years. This year, I wanted to do Jade Homestuck. In particular, I wanted to do her 3 a.m. dress. Unfortunately, there are a lot of really pretty galaxy prints in the world, but there's not a lot of galaxy prints that are explicitly a black background with lime green and silver accents. So today I'm gonna be trying to get a good galaxy going of green and silver in hopes that I get something that is workable as the 3 a.m. dress. And that is why I am wearing this rather than my tea gown, because my tea gown is nice and I don't want it covered in fabric paint. My first step was to experiment with my paint techniques before I did anything involving the actual dress that I was working on. Number one, because I wanted my galaxy design to be seamless on the gown, and also because I don't do a ton of this stuff. I'd never attempted to make a galaxy print before, let alone one that was for sure gonna look good in photographs and videography, which is a little bit different from getting one that looks really, really nice in real life, because there's just some depth and some perception stuff that makes it look different in real life as opposed to on film. And I was really finicky about how I wanted this to look. In the end, I experimented with thinning the paint out and using a mesh screen to try and get spatters to go, and using a toothbrush to flick stuff, and splattering with my little paintbrush and pouring glitter on it and different things, and I didn't really end up with any technique that I particularly loved, especially since I wanted something that was going to be so specific, and I didn't end up finding exactly the technique that achieved what I wanted, but in the end, I went with not a single thing that I am experimenting with here. After deciding that I could not stand the way that the sequins caught the light as compared to things like the glitter I had originally gone with, and experimenting with even more techniques like sponges and stuff, I found that glitter over spray paint was my favorite, and I wasted a bunch of money on painting supplies. You could really use any black wrap dress and get the same kind of effect that you wanted. I, however, happen to have my Christmas wrap dress and a lot of plain black cotton around at all times, because when are you not gonna have a use for plain black cotton? So that's what I ended up using, and I just used the same pattern as my Christmas dress. I just didn't put any sleeves on it because although the original is sleeveless entirely, like it doesn't have any shoulders or anything, I was not about that, considering it's still quite cold in New York and I intend to wear this at conventions, which don't always have fantastic summer weather. However, if you're really enthralled by the shape of the dress that I ended up with, I would recommend that you take a pattern from a random wrap dress, and instead of using the skirt that is included in the wrap dress, measure out how big the waist ends up being for your size, and then just cut a circle skirt out that will match the dimensions of that finished piece, because then it'll fit into your existing wrap dress pattern and you won't have to worry about drafting the bodice. And I'm gonna say that wrap dress bodices are really hard to draft. I found that out when I was making this dress at Christmas time. And for assembly, if you are not familiar with lining bodices, a lot of patterns that are modern will tell you to like squeeze your bodice through one of the strap openings, like leave one of them open and then like squeeze your whole bodice through. But I don't like doing that. Instead, I like to leave my side seams open and then sew the neck, like the neckline and the armholes, leaving a little bit at each end, leaving the side seams open, and then you can kind of shove one side of the bodice through the strap, not the strap opening, but through the middle, in order to end up with a really nicely lined bodice, rather than having to like go by hand after you've turned the whole thing inside out through a tiny hole in the sleeve strap. Then after that, you just turn the waist seam in 1/2 inch or whatever your seam allowance is, and pin that down. And then I just ran it through the machine because I just wanted the edges to be finished. I didn't care about them looking terribly neat, as this isn't a historical piece. This is just more of a cosplay recreational piece, and it ends up being kind of fragile anyway. I wasn't horrendously concerned with my finishing of edges and stuff here, since it is a pretty modern garment. Like, this is clearly not trying to be couture, although I may make a couture version of this at some point, because this doesn't have any pockets in it, and I'd kind of like to wear it at conventions, in which I probably do want pockets in it. But I just wanted to make something easy and fun for 413, so. Instead, I went for the easy-peasy finishing route and just left selvage edges raw and out there, no pockets, no hand-finished waist seam, we die like men. And don't bother hemming the dress at this point, because we are just gonna finish it off with some double fold bias binding in a contrasting color later, and we don't want to get paint on that. Then me, my dress form, and my dress went on a little field trip outside. I used my test fabric as a drop cloth of sorts to go on top of my dress form so that it wouldn't end up covered in paint, and just sort of pinned everything together. This pattern, because it's designed to fit me, doesn't quite fit my dress form, so I wasn't too concerned about having it pinned perfectly smoothly, and I knew that it was going to be sort of a scrappy, rough and tumble sort of a paint job anyway. Then I started painting once it was all pinned together, and I don't really have any strong tips for this. I just sort of decided where they should go, and I used sort of the white and the deep green as my base, just trying to keep the colors relatively clumped together, and put the green and silver over top of that, all sort of concentrated in similar areas where I thought they looked good, until I was satisfied. Then let the dress form outside of your patio door scare the crap out of you for a couple hours while it dries, and then spend somewhere between 9 and 11 hours individually gluing glitter onto this dress. Now, if you are masochist enough to want to attempt this yourself on your own dress, then I would recommend using the E6000 jewelry and bead glue for this task, after trying several different types of glue in order to achieve this effect. E6000 will work if you have one of those bottles with the tiny nozzle, but it isn't as secure as like the jewelry and bead one, and Fabri-Tac, while it will stick your glitter onto the fabric, it's not as durable as the E6000 was, and I found that I tended to shed glittery sparkles wherever I went. Like, there's a bunch of them in the car from where they just sort of peeled off, because this is kind of a fragile sort of project. I also used 2 different types of glitter on this project. I used the extra large silver glitters, like the just plain white ones that they have at Michael's, but I also used a Smallo holographic glitter that was smaller, but I found that that was, because I was doing this with tweezers with Fabri-Tac rather than anything with a nozzle that was small enough to actually support that I just had kind of a nightmare of a time getting those tiny hollow glitters upon my fabric, and ended up just giving up putting them all over in frustration, so those little hollow glitters are almost exclusively on the bodice and just below the bodice. And then I completely forgot to do any recording of me finishing the bottom off with double fold bias tape, but you can figure out how to do that pretty easily by just reading the instructions on some double fold bias tape. It's really not difficult. And while this project did come out looking pretty cool, I am already thinking of ways that I can upgrade this, like adding a cold shoulder sleeve onto it and adding more bias tape around the edges, so that may be a thing that is incoming if you ever meet me at a con, because the allure of this dress really is just that the glitter is reflective. I put off filming this for several days in order to let the weather clear up, only for the weather to be far too windy for me to even get any good footage while I was at the park, so I don't have terribly many shots of this glittering in the sun the way it should. I also bought some, like, actual round glasses to wear with this. However, they were so incredibly reflective that I was not used to it and didn't like the way the pictures looked, the few that I took in them. You can follow me on the various social medias down below. You will also find a link to my Discord server, which is not just for cosplayers and not just for historical costumers. It's a safe space for all sorts of queer and gender non-conforming costuming content. You can also find Eric Sheila's Bandcamp down below. He has graciously let me borrow his music from the first Homestuck soundtrack in order to make this video. So thank you, Eric, and thanks for watching.